My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm about to tell you the most extraordinary story of my career as a federal investigator. For 15 years, I've worked for the Treasury Department's Criminal Investigation Division, tracking down financial crimes that most people only see in movies. But nothing in my experience prepared me for the case that would consume 3 years of my life and challenge everything I thought I knew about security, trust, and human nature. It all began on a cold Monday morning in February 2019 when I received an urgent call from Director Sarah Williams. Her voice carried an unusual tension that immediately put me on high alert. "Marcus, I need you in my office immediately. We have a situation that requires your expertise." When I arrived at her office, I found her pacing behind her desk, something I'd never seen in our 10-year professional relationship. On her desk lay a thick file marked classified eyes only. "Marcus, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. We have a breach at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Someone has accessed Vault 7 Alpha. Vault 7 Alpha. Even hearing the name sent a chill down my spine. It was one of the most secure facilities in the United States, containing emergency, currency reserves, rare coins, and precious metals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The vault was protected by multiple layers of security that were supposedly impenetrable. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. $13 million in untraceable bearer bonds and rare coins? The theft was discovered during a routine audit yesterday. $13 million. It was one of the largest thefts in federal history, and somehow it had happened in what was considered the most secure facility in the country. "Do we have any suspects?" Director Williams opened the file and pulled out a photograph of a man in his early 40s, with intelligent eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years of manual work. "Meet David Harrison, 43 years old, master locksmith. He's been the primary security contractor for Vault 7 Alpha for the past 8 years. Impeccable record, top secret clearance, trusted by everyone who worked with him." I studied the photograph. David Harrison looked like any ordinary middle-aged man you might see at a hardware store or fixing locks in your neighborhood. Nothing about his appearance suggested he was capable of pulling off one of the most audacious thefts in American history. Where is he now? That's the problem. David Harrison disappeared 3 days ago. His apartment is empty, his bank accounts are closed, and his identity has essentially vanished. It's as if he never existed. The investigation began immediately. I assembled a team of the best investigators in the department, and we started by examining every detail of David Harrison's life, looking for clues that might explain how a trusted locksmith had become a master thief. What we discovered was fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. David Harrison was born in 1976 in Detroit, Michigan, to a working-class family. His father was a mechanic, and his mother worked as a secretary in a law firm. From an early age, David showed an unusual aptitude for understanding how things worked. His teachers described him as exceptionally intelligent but quiet, preferring to work with his hands rather than participate in social activities. At age 16, David began working part-time for a local locksmith named Frank Kowalski, a Polish immigrant who had built a reputation as one of the finest locksmiths in the Midwest. Frank became a father figure to David, teaching him not just the technical aspects of locksmithing, but the philosophy behind it. "A lock is a promise," Frank used to tell his apprentices. "It's a promise that what's inside will be safe. When someone trusts you with their security, you're holding their peace of mind in your hands." David absorbed these lessons and quickly proved to be a prodigy. By age 20, he could open locks that stumped locksmiths with decades of experience. But more importantly, he understood the psychology of security, how people thought about protecting their most valuable possessions. After Frank's death in 2001, David inherited the locksmith business and began specializing in high-security installations. His reputation grew rapidly in the security industry, and by 2005 he was being contracted by banks, government agencies, and corporations that needed the highest level of security expertise. In 2011, David was approached by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago to upgrade the security systems in their most sensitive vaults. The project was classified, requiring top-secret clearance and extensive background checks. David passed every test with flying colors. The work was complex and demanding. Vault 7 Alpha required a security system that could protect against every conceivable threat: explosives, cutting tools, electronic hacking, and even insider attacks. David spent 2 years designing and installing a system that was considered revolutionary in the Bay security industry. The vault featured multiple layers of protection, biometric scanners, time-locked mechanisms, motion sensors, and a lock system so complex that it required 3 different keys and a 16-digit code that changed daily. The system was designed so that no single person could access the vault alone. It required at least 2 authorized personnel working together. But David Harrison had designed the system. He knew every component, every weakness, every backup protocol. And over the 8 years he maintained the vault, he had been studying it, learning it, and planning. The breakthrough in our investigation came when we discovered David's real motivation. It wasn't greed, at least not in the traditional sense. Through financial records and personal documents we found in a storage unit registered under a false name, we learned that David had been secretly supporting a network of homeless shelters and food banks across the Midwest. His elderly neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Kowalski, Frank's widow, provided crucial insight into David's character. David never forgot where he came from, she told us. After Frank died, David made sure I never wanted for anything. He paid my medical bills, fixed my house, and never asked for anything in return. But he was angry about something. In the last few years, he became very bitter about inequality, about how the rich got richer while working people suffered. We discovered that David had been reading extensively about economic inequality, corporate corruption, and government waste. His apartment contained hundreds of books and articles about social justice, wealth, redistribution, and the failures of the financial system. But the most revealing discovery was a journal we found hidden in the false bottom of a toolbox. In it, Neitha had written extensively about his growing disillusionment with a system that protected the wealth of the few while ignoring the needs of the many. One entry dated 6 months before the theft read, "I've spent my entire career protecting the money of people who have more than they could spend in 10 lifetimes, while families sleep in their cars because they can't afford rent. The system is broken, and those with the power to fix it choose not to. Maybe it's time for someone to redistribute the wealth themselves." The planning for the theft had been meticulous and took place over several years. David had used his legitimate access to the vault to study every aspect of its security, identifying the brief windows of vulnerability that occurred during routine maintenance and system updates. The actual theft was executed with surgical precision. On February 10, 2019, during a scheduled maintenance window, David entered the vault, using his legitimate credentials. But instead of performing routine maintenance, he accessed the emergency override system he had designed years earlier, a system known only to him and intended for use only in catastrophic emergencies. Using this override, David was able to temporarily disable the motion sensors and time lock mechanisms. He then accessed the bearer bonds and rare coins, selecting items that would be difficult to trace and easy to transport. The entire operation took less than 40 minutes, and David was careful to reset all systems to their normal state before leaving the theft when undetected for 5 days, because David had programmed the security system to show normal readings, even though the vault contents had been compromised. It was only during a routine physical audit that the missing items were discovered. By then, David Harrison had vanished completely. He had closed his bank accounts, sold his possessions, and disappeared without leaving any trace of where he might have gone. But as our investigation deepened, we began to realize that David's disappearance was as carefully planned as the theft itself, and the trail he left behind would lead us into a world of underground networks, false identities, and a modern-day Robin Hood, who had declared war on the financial system itself. The man we were chasing wasn't just a thief, he was someone who believed he was fighting for justice, using his extraordinary skills to redistribute wealth from those who had too much to those who had nothing at all, and he was just getting started. The investigation into David Harrison's disappearance revealed a level of planning and sophistication that left even experienced federal agents amazed. This wasn't a spontaneous crime of opportunity, it was the culmination of years of careful preparation by someone who understood both security systems and human psychology better than almost anyone alive. Our first major breakthrough came when we discovered that David had been creating false identities for over 3 years before the theft. Working with the FBI's Identity Crimes Unit, we uncovered a network of at least 7 different personas that David had established, each with legitimate documentation, credit histories, and even employment records. The most sophisticated of these identities was Michael Thompson, a freelance security consultant based in Portland, Oregon. Michael Thompson had a social security number, a driver's license, bank accounts, and even a small apartment that David had been renting for 2 years. The identity was so well constructed that Michael Thompson had filed tax returns, maintained good credit, and even had a membership at a local gym. This level of identity creation requires extensive knowledge of bureaucratic systems and significant financial resources, explained Agent Lisa Rodriguez from the FBI's Identity Crimes Unit. Harrison didn't just create fake IDs, he created entire life histories that could withstand scrutiny from law enforcement and financial institutions. But the most disturbing discovery was how David had acquired the skills and resources to create these identities. Through our investigation, we learned that he had been studying identity theft and document forgery techniques for years, using his legitimate business as a cover to access the tools and information he needed. David's Locksmith business had given him access to government buildings, banks, and corporate offices where he could observe security procedures, study identification systems, and even gain access to blank documents and official seals. Over the years, he had been quietly collecting the materials and knowledge he would need to disappear completely. The financial trail was equally sophisticated. David had been slowly liquidating his legitimate assets for over 2 years, converting everything into untraceable forms of wealth. He sold his locksmith business to a competitor, claiming he wanted to retire early. He sold his house, his car, and most of his possessions, telling friends and neighbors that he was planning to travel the world. But instead of spending the money, David had been converting it into cryptocurrency, precious metals, and bearer bonds, forms of wealth that could be easily transported and difficult to trace. By the time of the theft, David had accumulated over $400,000 in liquid, untraceable assets, in addition to the $13 million he stole from the vault. The day of his disappearance, February 13, 2019, David Harrison ceased to exist. He abandoned his apartment, leaving behind only basic furniture and a few personal items that contained no useful information. His cell phone was found in a dumpster 3 blocks away, wiped clean of all data. But Michael Thompson boarded a flight from Chicago to Seattle that same evening, using a ticket purchased with cash 2 weeks earlier. From Seattle, the trail became much more difficult to follow. Our investigation revealed that David had spent months studying surveillance systems in airports, train stations, and bus terminals. He knew exactly how to move through transportation hubs without being detected by facial recognition systems or other tracking technologies. From Seattle, Michael Thompson rented a car using a credit card linked to one of his false identities. The car was returned 3 days later in Vancouver, Canada, but by then, Michael Thompson had also disappeared, replaced by another of David's carefully constructed personas. The international aspect of the case required coordination with Canadian authorities and Interpol. We learned that David had been planning his escape route for over a year, studying visa requirements, extradition treaties, and banking regulations in dozens of countries. But David wasn't just running. He was actively using the stolen money to fund what he saw as a righteous cause. Through financial intelligence gathered by the Treasury Department, we began tracking unusual charitable donations and cash transfers that bore the hallmarks of David's operation. In March 2019, just 1 month after the theft, homeless shelters in 5 different cities received anonymous donations totaling $200,000. The donations were made through a complex network of shell companies and cryptocurrency exchanges that made them nearly impossible to trace back to their source. In April, a food bank in Detroit received a $100,000 donation with a note that read, "For the people Frank Kowalski would have wanted to help." Frank Kowalski was David's mentor, the locksmith who had taught him his trade and his philosophy about protecting people's security. The pattern continued throughout 2019. Anonymous donations appeared at organizations that helped homeless veterans, provided meals for hungry families, and offered job training for unemployed workers. The donations were always made in ways that protected the recipients from any legal liability, and they always came with notes that referenced social justice or economic inequality. But David wasn't just giving money away randomly. Our analysis revealed that he was targeting his donations very carefully, focusing on organizations that served the communities he had grown up in, working-class neighborhoods where people struggled to pay rent, buy food, and access basic healthcare. The investigation took a dramatic turn in September 2019, when we received a letter addressed to me personally at the Treasury Department. The letter had been mailed from Toronto, Canada, but by the time we traced it, the sender had already moved on. The letter was typed on plain paper, with no identifying marks, but the content was unmistakably from David Harrison. "Agent Chen, I know you're looking for me, and I respect the job you're trying to do, but I want you to understand why I did what I did. For 8 years, I protected a vault full of money that could have fed thousands of families, housed hundreds of homeless people, or provided health care for those who couldn't afford it. Instead, it sat there, earning interest for people who already had more money than they could spend in several lifetimes. I didn't steal that money for personal gain. I redistributed it to people who actually needed it. Every dollar I took has gone to organizations that are making a real difference in people's lives. The system is broken. Agent Chen, the wealthy get wealthier while working people struggle to survive. The government protects the assets of the rich while ignoring the needs of the poor. Someone had to act. I know you'll keep looking for me, and I respect that. But I hope you'll also think about what I've said. Maybe the real crime isn't taking money from those who have too much. Maybe it's allowing people to suffer when we have the resources to help them. Respectfully, a concerned citizen." The letter was analyzed by forensic experts, but it yielded no useful physical evidence. However, it confirmed what we had suspected. David Harrison saw himself not as a criminal, but as a social justice warrior, fighting against an unjust system. The psychological profile developed by FBI behavioral analysts painted a picture of someone who is highly intelligent, deeply principled, and completely convinced of the righteousness of his cause. Dr. Patricia Williams, criminal psychologist who consulted on the case, explained David's mindset. Harrison exhibits characteristics of what we call a mission-oriented criminal. He doesn't see himself as breaking the law for personal gain. He sees himself as correcting an injustice that the legal system has failed to address. This makes him extremely dangerous because he's willing to take enormous risks for what he believes is a greater good. As 2019 turned into 2020, the trail grew colder, but the donations continued. David had apparently established a sophisticated network for laundering and distributing the stolen money, using cryptocurrency exchanges, offshore accounts, and a web of shell companies that spanned multiple countries. The COVID-19 pandemic created new challenges for our investigation, but it also revealed more about David's operations. As unemployment soared and food insecurity increased, the anonymous donations intensified. Struggling families began receiving mysterious cash payments in their mailboxes. Small businesses on the verge of bankruptcy received anonymous loans with no interest and no repayment requirements. By early 2021, we estimated that David had distributed over $8 million of the stolen money to various charitable causes and individuals in need. The remaining $5 million was presumably being held in reserve for future operations or for David's own survival needs. But David Harrison had made one crucial mistake in his otherwise perfect plan. In his desire to help people, he had established patterns that would eventually lead us to him. And in May 2021, those patterns would converge in a way that would bring us closer to capturing one of the most elusive fugitives in federal law enforcement history. The hunt for David Harrison was about to enter its final phase, and neither he nor we were prepared for how it would end. The break we had been waiting for came from an unexpected source in May 2021. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a social worker at a community health clinic in Minneapolis, contacted our tip line with information that would change the entire trajectory of our investigation. "I think I know who's been making the anonymous donations in our area," she told Agent Rodriguez during their initial phone conversation. "There's a man who's been volunteering at our clinic for the past 6 months. He goes by the name Robert Chen, but something about him doesn't add up." The name Robert Chen immediately caught my attention. It was too much of a coincidence that a suspect would choose a surname matching the lead investigator on his case. When Dr. Martinez described the volunteer, we knew we had found our target. "He's incredibly knowledgeable about security systems," she explained. "Last month, when our clinic was broken into, Robert completely redesigned our locks and alarm system. He did it for free, said he just wanted to help keep our patients and staff safe. But the level of expertise he showed, it was far beyond what you'd expect from a regular volunteer. Within hours, we had a surveillance team in Minneapolis. Robert Chen was living in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood, volunteering at the health clinic 3 days a week and working part-time at a local food bank. To all outward appearances, he was exactly what he claimed to be, a retired security consultant who wanted to give back to his community. But our investigation revealed the truth. Robert Chen's identity was as carefully constructed as Michael Thompson's had been, complete with employment history, references, and even medical records. David Harrison had been living in Minneapolis for over a year, quietly integrating himself into the community while continuing his mission of wealth redistribution. The surveillance operation revealed David's daily routine and, more importantly, his operational security measures. He was extraordinarily careful, varying his routes, checking for surveillance, and using multiple layers of identity protection. But he had one weakness. His genuine desire to help people had made him visible in ways that pure criminality would not have. On June 15, 2021, we observed David meeting with a young woman named Maria Santos outside the community health clinic. Maria was a single mother of 2 who had been struggling to pay for her daughter's medical treatments. Through our surveillance, we learned that David had been quietly paying Maria's medical bills for months, using a complex system of anonymous payments that protected both of them from detection. But this act of kindness would prove to be David's undoing. Maria's daughter, Isabella, had a rare genetic condition that required expensive medications. David had been purchasing these medications through a network of pharmacies, using different identities and payment methods to avoid detection. However, the specific combination of medications was so unusual that it created a unique financial signature that our analysts were able to track. The decision to arrest David Harrison was not made lightly. He had become something of a folk hero. In the communities where he operated, known for his anonymous generosity and genuine care for people in need, arresting him would likely cause significant backlash from the very people we were sworn to protect. But David Harrison was still a federal fugitive who had stolen $13 million from a government facility. Regardless of his motivations or how he had used the money, he had committed serious crimes that could not be ignored. The arrest was planned for June 22, 2021, at the community health clinic where David volunteered. We chose this location because it was public enough to ensure safety, but also because we hoped David's concern for the clinic's patients would prevent him from doing anything that might endanger innocent people. I led the arrest team personally, along with 6 other federal agents. We had studied David's psychological profile extensively and believed that a direct, honest approach would be most effective. At 2:30 p.m., as David was leaving the clinic after his volunteer shift, I approached him in the parking lot. "David Harrison, I'm Agent Marcus Chen with the Treasury Department. "You're under arrest for the theft of federal property." David stopped walking and turned to face me. For a moment, he looked genuinely surprised, but then his expression shifted to something that looked almost like relief. "Agent Chen," he said, calmly, "I've been wondering when you'd find me. I have to admit, I'm impressed it took this long." David made no attempt to run or resist arrest. He placed his hands behind his back and allowed Agent Rodriguez to handcuff him without any struggle. As we walked toward our vehicles, he asked only one question: "Will the people I've been helping be protected?" "They had nothing to do with any of this. That's not up to me," I replied honestly. "But I'll make sure the prosecutors know that your beneficiaries were unaware of the source of the money." The ride back to the federal building was quiet. David stared out the window at the neighborhoods where he had been working, and I could see genuine sadness in his eyes. Whatever else was David Harrison truly cared about the people he had been trying to help? The interrogation began that evening. David waived his right to an attorney, saying he wanted to explain his actions in his own words. What followed was one of the most extraordinary confessions I had ever heard. "I want to be clear about something from the beginning," David said. "I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry I got caught because it means I can't help any more people. But I'm not sorry for redistributing money from a government vault to families who needed it to survive." Over the next 6 hours, David provided a complete account of his crimes. From the initial planning stages through his disappearance and the distribution of the stolen money, he was methodical, precise, and completely unrepentant. "You want to know why I did it?" he asked at one point. "Because I spent 8 years protecting money that belonged to a system that doesn't care about human suffering. I watched families lose their homes while billions of dollars sat in vaults, earning interest for people who already had more than they needed." David explained his philosophy in detail. He believed that extreme wealth inequality was a form of violence against the poor, and that redistributing wealth from those who had too much to those who had nothing was not only morally justified but morally required. "I know you think I'm a criminal," he said to me directly, "but I think the real criminals are the people who have the power to end poverty and choose not to use it. I just did what they should have been doing all along." The confession was legally airtight. David admitted to every aspect of the theft, provided details about his methods, and even offered to help recover any remaining stolen funds. But he refused to express remorse for his actions. "If I had to do it over again, I would," he said. "The only thing I would change is that I would have stolen more." The trial of David Harrison became a media sensation. Prosecutors painted him as a dangerous criminal who had violated the trust placed in him and stolen money belonging to the American people. The defense argued that David was a modern-day Robin Hood who had used his skills to help the most vulnerable members of society. Evidence against David was overwhelming, and he made no attempt to deny his guilt. But the trial became less about his criminal liability and more about the moral questions his actions had raised. Was it wrong to steal money that was being used to protect the wealth of the already wealthy? Was David a criminal or a social justice warrior? The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. David was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. But the story didn't end with David's conviction. The case had sparked a national conversation about wealth inequality, the role of government in protecting private property, and the moral obligations of individuals when faced with systemic injustice. Many of the organizations that had received David's anonymous donations continued to operate, using the money to help thousands of people. The families whose medical bills he had paid, the homeless shelters he had funded, and the food banks he had supported all continued their work, creating a lasting legacy of his actions. David Harrison is currently serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. He spends his time teaching literacy classes to other inmates and working in the prison's vocational training program. He has never expressed regret for his actions, and he continues to receive hundreds of letters from people who consider him a hero. The $13 million David stole was never fully recovered. Approximately $8 million was distributed to various charitable causes and individuals in need. The remaining $5 million disappeared into the complex network of accounts and identities that David had created. And despite extensive investigation, it has never been found. Some investigators believe that David had accomplices who are still at large, continuing his mission of wealth redistribution. Others think he simply hid the money so well that it may never be recovered. David himself has never provided any information about the missing funds, claiming that he has said everything he intends to say about his actions. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago completely redesigned the security systems for Vault 7 Alpha, implementing new protocols that would prevent anyone from having the kind of access that David had exploited. The vault now requires multiple authorization levels and constant oversight, making a similar theft virtually impossible. But the questions raised by David Harrison's actions remain unanswered. In a world where billions of people live in poverty, while a small number of individuals control vast wealth, what are the moral obligations of those who have the power to redistribute resources? Is it ever justified to break the law in service of what one believes to be a greater good? David Harrison believed he knew the answers to these questions, and he was willing to sacrifice his freedom to act on his convictions. Whether history will judge him as a criminal or a hero remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the case of the locksmith who stole $13 million from a federal vault and disappeared will be remembered as one of the most extraordinary crimes of the 21st century, not just for its audacity, but for the moral questions it forced us all to confront. Legal notice: this story is completely fictional and was created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.